So you've started a career in cybersecurity. Sounds pretty easy, right? Or maybe you feel stuck, looking at an impossible mountain to climb with no clue of how to find your footing. But fortunately, you've stumbled across Scaling the Wall, a podcast that breaks down the cybersecurity journey into manageable steps. I'm your host, Will Brooks. In each episode, I'll be your guide as we interact with others who are living and breathing cybersecurity every single day. We'll hear their stories, learn from their experiences, and gather those golden nuggets of wisdom they've picked up along the way. No jargon, no hype, just real talk about what it takes to build a successful career in this exciting field from those who have paved the way. So grab your gear and get ready to climb as we scale the wall of cybersecurity together. Well, Eric, thanks for jumping in here and having a conversation.
Of course.
I know. So for context for everybody, Eric is a cyber lawyer. Is that how you define yourself?
Yeah, lawyer, a cyber lawyer, MSP lawyer,
Cool.
technology lawyer.
A lawyer of many things specific to the technology space, MSPs, managed service providers. And Eric is working with us at FifthWall because we have a lot of MSPs coming to us who do tech E&O. And Eric, I wanted to have a sit down with you here at Right of Boom. Shout out to Right of Boom. Wanted to have a sit down here so we could talk a little bit more detail about all the things, maybe some of the things, we probably won't hit everything, but a lot of the things MSPs should know around the legal space, cyber insurance. My first question for you, because I get this from a lot of MSP partners who we connect with, is, hey, I'm afraid to talk to my clients about insurance because that, I feel like I could get sued, things could go bad.
Yeah.
Like, is there some level MSPs should be engaging their clients around cyber insurance with?
Yeah.
And what does that look like?
Absolutely is the answer, and I counsel my clients on this topic all the time because I hear the same thing you do, right? Mm-hmm. We don't want to talk about it, we don't want to require it, we're afraid if we require it, they're not going to go with us, they'll go with someone else. But I always encourage my clients to contractually require their customers to carry cyber liability insurance, and here's why. Believe it or not, it's not because I expect all of their customers to carry cyber liability insurance. It's because if they don't carry cyber liability insurance, I want to know why. If I'm the MSP, I want to. And in my practice, there's one of two different reasons almost every time. One reason is, from the customer perspective, I don't have cyber because I can't get cyber. And maybe that's why I'm coming to you, Mr. MSP, because I need you to get me up to some minimum level of insurability, and then I can go get cyber. Right? I don't have any heartburn over customers like that. Right. Because then we can write into the agreement, they'll get cyber in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, whatever it is, fine. I'm really okay. The second one is what's concerning to me. The second path is, I don't have cyber, I don't want cyber, cyber's not important, cyber's too expensive, and the winner is, why do I need cyber if I have you, Mr. MSP?
Oh, the classic, yeah.
The classic,
the objections, right?
The land tech case, right, that we'll probably talk about soon. Those are the customers that scare the hell out of me, right? Because they don't take their cybersecurity posture seriously. That's why I want my clients to require their customers in a contract to carry cyber. Again, not because yes or no they have it, but it'll drive the conversation. And once it drives the conversation, then as the MSP, I can figure out, do I want this customer? Do I need to charge this customer more? There's a whole gamut of possible outcomes.
Why do you think MSPs are so afraid to even talk about cyber insurance in the first place? Like, what's instilling that fear?
I think that it's a black and white issue with the MSP. I think that if once they start talking about it, if their customer doesn't have it, then the customer is going to go somewhere else. I'm not going to get the deal. I've been prospecting this for 6 months.
Interesting, yeah.
That's number one. Number two, I think that there's just a general lack of understanding about cyber. And that's where you guys come in, right?
Sure.
You guys counsel the MSPs on what is cyber, why is cyber important, why is it important for my customers to carry it, et cetera, et cetera.
I get the sense, and maybe you see this with your MSP clients, I get the sense that sometimes there's a little bit of fear around I'm not licensed, so I can't talk about insurance at all.
Yeah, and there's a line, right? You never want to
course.
cross the line, and you don't want to recommend coverages. You don't want to recommend limits. I don't like it when my clients want to write into a contract, you have to carry $1 million of cyber, or even you have to carry at least $1 million of cyber. I don't like that either.
Sure.
Because, Murphy's Law will tell you that their first experience with insurance is going to lead to $1.5 million claim.
Right.
And, well, why didn't you require at least $1.5 million then? So yeah, leave that to the brokers, leave that to the insurance experts. Don't act like a broker, but that doesn't mean you can't engage in the conversation about the topic, because they're going to bring you into it. They're going to bring you in on the insurance application, right? And that's a whole nother gamut of risk that the MSP is going to have to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have seen that a lot with MSPs is, and I don't blame them, because when you look at a lot of businesses, like, oh, I want to go win a contract for this construction company, they say you need to be carrying $5 million in cyber general liability. Or they also say you need to carry $5 million in cyber, which is hilarious, but it's besides the point. But there's a lot of that, like specific number language. So a lot of MSPs say that. What are your thoughts? Because one of the things we've suggested in the past is you need to explore, or you need to carry comprehensive cyber liability, as opposed to saying just generically go get coverage.
Yeah.
Or is there something, and maybe this gets into the MSA territory a little bit, is it worth having the conversation around, hey, we require you to go get cyber, and also we're going to audit it? Like, what's that?
So I don't recommend that.
Right.
I recommend that they require it contractually.
Sure.
And then they can negotiate it out if they want to, or change it if they want to. But I don't want them to go further than that.
Sure.
It's just not a good idea to do it.
I think I agree with that. How do you recommend? Because I guess you're walking two lines here. So the one line is I don't want to give any specifics, because if I give specifics, they can come back to bite me in the butt.
Yeah.
On the other side, I want to protect my own business. And if my clients are going out and getting janky cyber policies because I just told them to go get cyber, you run into the same Murphy's Law issue you ran into before.
Exactly.
Go get cyber. My buddy Carl over there goes and gets a cyber policy that was $200 added onto his BOP.
Yeah.
And now he's not covered for anything.
I know.
And, oh, MSP, you told me to go get cyber.
Yeah.
And then they get scared of that too. So that's where I'm like, what is the line there of saying, how do you?
There's no good answer. I don't recommend that my MSP customers ask for proof of coverage or anything like that, because then they've got to keep up with it.
Sure.
Because then if it lapses, for example, a year goes by, 2 years goes by, and they forget to ask for an updated copy of it, and the insurance lapses, now is the MSP somehow responsible through some theory of waiver or something that the customer doesn't have it, but now it's okay even though it was contractually required.
Yeah.
So I just like to say that the customer is required to carry it. I don't like getting into the specifics. If it turns out they go and get a crappy cyber liability policy, so be it, right? But they have cyber liability coverage, at least a little bit of it. And it's certainly better than nothing. I'm dealing with a situation now, it came up a week or so ago, where one of my clients, who's an MSP, a decent-sized MSP in Florida, they had a prospect reach out to them. They'd been prospecting this customer for 6 months. And the prospect called them and said, yeah, one of our guys, they clicked on a link in an email, and now their computer is acting funny, and the computer sent emails out and things like that. And the first question is, do you have cyber? And so we set them up with a breach coach and incident response and all that. And it turns out they did have one of those janky add-on to the BOP, cyber policies that isn't going to do them any good, which just means they're going to be out of pocket more.
Yeah.
And frankly, if my client can't close that deal, now I don't know what deal they could close. But but yeah, it is a fine line. There's no great answer, but it is just important to require it in general.
So you are advocating for requiring cyber, because a lot of MSPs I run into say, well, we strongly recommend it.
Yeah.
And this is probably not a legal sense question here. This is more like a business sense question, because in my mind, going back to what you said before, if you're just recommending your clients have cyber and then they're just like, okay, well, I'm not going to go get it, and then they don't, and then they have an incident, who are they pointing the finger at?
Yeah, exactly. Recommending something in a contract, it's not worth the ink that it's written.
What's the point? Yeah, what's the point of even including
exactly.
it?
Yeah.
Oh, you should go look at this, explore this option.
We're going to recommend that you have us manage your backups. But if you don't want to have backups, then okay,
we're going to recommend you cook me a steak dinner every Friday.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that's the it's interesting language to
Yeah.
recommend something. So
Yeah, not a fan.
no, can we talk about MSAs for a minute?
Of course.
Because that's something that admittedly, just like a lot of MSPs don't want to touch insurance, I really don't give a lot of advice on MSAs. I just
Yeah.
tell them they should have one.
That's good.
And I don't know any details about it, so then we
Yeah.
point them to someone like you. Do you see more and more MSPs getting serious around MSAs nowadays? I mean, obviously you're going to continue to see MSPs, but for a while there was the whole break fix scene,
Right.
Right, and it's like, oh, my buddy Travis started a company, and
Right.
he's my friend, so we had a handshake deal, and
Exactly.
I do his security now.
Yeah.
And obviously business is often done on handshakes and friendships and personal realities, but do you see more MSPs starting to get serious about the MSA, or do you see roadblocks?
Where I see them starting to get more serious is when they're making that transition from break fix to MSP. For whatever reason, they think they don't need an MSA when they're doing break fix, and
Yeah.
it couldn't be further from the truth. There's a tremendous amount of risk even in break fix. So you need an MSP regardless of the services that you're providing. An MSA, regardless of the services that you're providing. You need an MSA if you're reselling product.
Yeah.
Right, you need legal terms and conditions behind product, whether it's hardware, software, or resold services. It's just as important as having an MSA in place for professional services or managed services or hosting. Be surprised how many MSPs out there are still providing some kind of hosting services. You need an MSA. And am I seeing people get more serious about it? It still shocks me how many MSPs out there don't have either any MSA at all, under the theory of, well, they've been a client for 20 years or 30 years, or they're my cousin-in-law or whatever. But it's all over the board.
Yeah.
Highly recommend you don't do business without an MSA.
Yeah, I mean, they've been my client for 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
I see some of the pushback. This is even with talking about cyber insurance or an MSA, or maybe you want to push new security, you want to solicit new security. A lot of MSPs would rather go out and find some new client
Yes.
which fine, you should always do sales, right? But then rather than turn to their current client base and say, let me hold you accountable
Yeah.
to the same standards I'm holding any new client to.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. I mean, I guess that's friendship.
I see it, yeah.
Yeah.
And I see it a lot because someone will reach out to me who I've been talking to over the past 6 months, and they haven't done it, and then they'll call me one day or send me an email saying, oh, I'm about to close a deal with new client X, and now I need an MSA.
They didn't have one yet.
They didn't have one yet. And here's how I typically will get through to an MSP, because no one wants to hear the legal arguments about why you need an MSA.
Sure.
And I explain it in one of two different ways. One of them is a funnel. Think about risk, right? That's what I do is I manage risk. So I think about risk as a funnel. And the walls of the funnel are your contracts with your customers.
Right.
A lot of risk in the top of the funnel. Your contract narrows it down, right? But it's not a bowl. Some stuff's going to fall out. It's a funnel. And the stuff that falls out, that should be an insured claim, right? And that's how legal and insurance kind of works together. So that's one way I explain to them why they need it. The other way has nothing to do with legal or with risk. It's about, do you plan on selling your company one day?
Right.
And if you plan on selling your company one day, what are you going to sell? You're not selling your people, right? There's no such thing as indentured servitude anymore. You're selling your contracts. And if you don't have contracts, if you're an acquirer, I don't care how long you've been doing business with a customer. If you don't have a contract, you have nothing to sell me. So your contracts, especially good contracts, add tremendously to the enterprise value of your organization. That sometimes will resonate with an MSP who's been putting an MSA in place.
It's interesting. My brain goes to the insurance world because that's where I live right now. All insurance policies are considered legal contracts, right?
Yeah.
That's what they are. And you would never have a handshake insurance agreement with someone. I mean, I guess you
Exactly.
could, but you wouldn't.
Right.
Because if I went and sold my agency, I would be selling my book of business. My book of business exists because I have all these insureds who are under contract, right?
Right.
So that's really interesting. So
Or what happens when the customer with whom you've had a handshake deal sells themselves?
Yeah.
And now you're providing services to a company you don't know anything about their new ownership.
They don't care about your handshakes.
Couldn't care less.
Yeah, interesting. It really makes you think, and this might be super deviating from our original topic, but I'm interested. Something that I've always thought about is, and I was telling you before we started recording that I was working in the ministry before coming over to FifthWall. One of the things that the lead pastor I was working under talked about a lot was succession planning.
Yeah.
Churches are notoriously terrible at this. So you have a pastor who builds an amazing program,
Yeah.
leaves, and then the whole program falls apart because
That's right.
never succession planned. And that makes me think of businesses in general. Like, what's the point of starting a business? Obviously, you have a passion for something. You're
Yeah.
enjoying it. Your relationships, clients, all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, like, and especially in the tech industry, I've
Yeah.
learned like a major goal is to sell.
To sell. Yeah, the MSP businesses are not the kind that are typically passed down generation to generation. They typically end with whatever generation started it, and then they go do something else. But
Right.
but you're absolutely right. If that's the goal, why would you ever do business without a solid contract?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So speaking of the MSA piece, and for any MSP that comes to FifthWall at this point looking for tech errors and omissions, actually maybe let's take a step back. Tech errors and omissions,
Yeah.
a lot of MSPs come to us, they'll actually give us their policy and say, hey, I have a cyber policy, let me review it, and they don't have tech errors and omissions. And I'm sure you're familiar with tech errors and omissions now. Is that something when an MSP comes to you that you tell them that they need to go explore? Do you
Absolutely.
have that conversation?
It's part of my introductory conversation with every
Yeah.
prospective client. Because like I said, it's the funnel,
Yeah.
right? It's great that the contracts narrow it down, but some stuff is always going to fall out the bottom.
Right.
Just make sure that that's an insured claim. You don't, the whole point of having contracts is so you don't have to bet your business every time you walk out the door to perform services.
Sure.
That's it, right? When you really, really get down to the rudimentary level, same thing with insurance. You don't want to have to bet your business. I mean, there's a lot of MSPs out there that couldn't sustain a $100,000 uninsured claim. It would put them out of business,
Yeah.
or at least seriously hurt their business. And if instead you can pay a relatively small retention or deductible, have insurance cover the rest, then great.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So that's the tech E&O piece. And for anyone listening, and this is not a solicitation, it's more of an advice thing. Tech errors and omissions is like, hey, I have this cyber liability policy. I'm adding this additional service on top for covering my professional services as a tech risk. So if you're an MSP, you might go to your agent. They say, hey, you need errors and omissions, which every business needs. It might not be, tech services related. A lot of times standard errors and omissions exclude that. So
Right.
you just want to make sure you have that type of coverage. It's really important to your business. So sidebar, going back.
And think of it as malpractice insurance, right? I carry malpractice insurance.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, but
Right.
for the IT industry.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. So, so then taking that additional step. So we send anyone who's looking for tech errors and omissions through FifthWall over to Eric for an MSA review. And what we've been seeing is a lot of carriers are starting to get more strict around MSPs having MSAs.
Yeah.
What are some of the things you see as like gaping holes in, because I'm guessing MSAs exist out there that aren't good.
Lots of
So,
them.
I mean, we do a lot of policy reviews that aren't
Yeah.
good, right? So
Yeah.
what are some of the gaping holes you see in some MSAs nowadays?
So you have to-
insurance aside, because we always talk
Yeah,
about
of course,
that one.
of course. But you have to look at the source of your MSA. Did you get your MSA from some kind of group, an ASCII group, a tech tribe, or whatever? Did you get your MSA from your insurance broker, right?
That'd be an interesting one.
I see it, believe me.
Wow.
Not for you guys, but there are MSP-focused insurance brokers that will
Sure.
hand out MSAs like M&Ms.
Right. M&Ms.
And they're not good.
Right.
They just aren't good. Just like most of the ones that you can find online in various chat groups and things like that aren't good. When I get a hold of a new client's or prospective client's MSA for the first time, usually on a scale of 1 to 10, it's a 2 or a 3.
Wow.
It's just really, really, really bad. And you ask what the gaping holes are. You look at the number one biggest issue in MSAs, and it's limitation of liability. It's in reliance on hundreds of years of contract law. The courts have said that vendors are allowed to limit their liability to their customers. And they do it in two different ways. They limit the types of damages that are recoverable, and they limit the amount of damages recoverable. So for the types of damages recoverable, and you've seen this in contracts where it says that you're not going to be responsible for indirect damages, special damages, consequential damages, lost profits, lost revenue, lost goodwill, all that stuff. You're only on the hook for direct damages. Damages that were reasonably foreseeable and proximately caused by your acts and omissions. So put that aside. That's one way to limit liability. The other way is by limiting the type. So if the customer does experience direct damages, what is the amount of damages that you could be responsible for? And usually it's a backward-looking period of 6 months, 9 months, 12 months of services. that the customer still has to prove actual direct damages, and then you as the MSP would be responsible for up to that amount, and hopefully that amount would be covered by your tech E&O or your cyber, depending on the nature of the issue. But that's the number one issue, and I never see MSPs get it right in their MSAs before I get a hold of them. There's usually all sorts of carve-outs, or they only limit the types, or they only limit the amounts, or they'll limit the amount to $1,000, which probably isn't enforceable, because even though it's written down, each side agrees to it, it still has to be reasonable. And a $1,000 limitation of liability, if you're doing $1 million with a customer, probably isn't reasonable.
Who determines reasonability of something like that?
The 80-year-old judge sitting behind the bench who can't even spell IT. Unfortunately, it's an issue for the trier of fact.
Yeah.
And that's what happens, is that if you ever end up in court, and look, usually you don't end up in court and it's settled well beforehand, but if you ever do, then the court is going to decide, and your customer is going to argue that it's not reasonable. You're going to argue that it is reasonable. Mm-hmm. And the problem with that is that courts are in the business of enforcing contracts or not enforcing contracts. They are not in the business of rewriting contracts. So if you have a limitation of liability that's a 6-month backward-looking period, and the judge says, well, I don't think 6 months is reasonable, but I think 9 months is, they don't get out their pen and cross out 6 and write 9. They just say that your clause isn't enforceable. And now you have no limitation of liability.
Interesting. Yeah.
So that's why it's so important. And again, this is just kind of a microcosm of an MSA, but that's why it's so important to get it right. Because if you don't get it right, it's not like you're going to screw up a little bit. It's an all or nothing proposition.
Wow. Yeah. So.
But other things, like non-solicitation provisions. You don't want your customers hiring your people, right? Your people are your business. Without your people, and you're probably charging a lot more money to your customer than you're paying your people, which is what you should be doing as an MSP. It's how you make money, but your customer knows that too. And maybe they'd want to hire your person if they're providing an awful lot of services to them. So you want a provision in the contract that talks about that.
Sure.
You want indemnification provisions, warranty provisions. You want payment terms, really, really solid payment terms. You want the right to suspend providing services if your customer's not paying you, instead of just having to terminate a contract. So there's when I get done writing MSAs, it's usually 15 or 20 pages of text.
Yeah. So in line with kind of all of that, I want to go back to like the liability piece. So when you go to like a trampoline park and they make you sign a waiver, mm-hmm. and those waivers are like kind of enforceable, but mm-hmm. they're also kind of not, because it's like,
they're called adhesion contracts.
Yes. So what's the difference? Because I'm not a legal person.
Sure.
I'm saying, hey, what's the difference between my trampoline park's waiver and an MSA? Like, why is an MSA more enforceable than this trampoline
than an adhesion contract? So
Yeah.
an adhesion contract is a contract that's put in front of you, and you have no opportunity to negotiate it. You really don't have much opportunity to even read it. They just say, here, sign at the bottom, and you sign at the bottom, and you go, because your kids are tugging at your pants, and they want to go jump on the trampolines. Those contracts are much more difficult to enforce than a traditional contract that you put in front of your customer, and your customer has time to contemplate it, time to negotiate it, time to work through it. Usually those contracts are more enforceable. But then again, I'm also a big fan of putting MSAs online. Not in any public-facing form where you can go click on a link in your website and there it is, but like I said, an MSA is going to be 15 or 20 pages by the time you're done with it. You don't necessarily want to put that in front of your customer, because then you're in kind of the sales prevention business. Instead, put a statement of work in front of your customer that's got a few pages of business terms, what you're actually going to do for them, and include a link at the bottom of your contract that says, hey, Mr. Customer, look, the MSA at www.whatever is controlling this contract. And that is just as enforceable as having an ink signature on an MSA. So even though you're not putting it in front of them, even though they've got to click on a link or type in a URL to get to the MSA, it's still a very, very enforceable way to get the customer to enter into the contract.
That's interesting. So I'm an MSP. I mean, I'm not. But if I was an MSP and I wanted to start my business, mm-hmm. At what point do you recommend I go out and get an MSA?
Before you start prospecting your first customer.
Right, so even before I have a single client.
Yeah, because as soon as you have a client that says yes, you don't want to spend the next 3 weeks trying to figure out what your MSA is going to say. And I know it's a little bit expensive, right, especially when you don't have any revenue.
Sure.
But it's certainly a cost of business that's well worth spending.
Right, you're investing in the future of your business.
Absolutely.
If you think, hey, I have a good idea, we say the same thing with tech E&O.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, we have a lot of new MSPs who sometimes reach out to us say, hey, when do I have to get a tech E&O policy? It's like, hey, before you have your first client, you need to have
before
one
you
of those,
turn
right?
the first screw, you gotta
have those initial groundwork pieces in place that are protecting you as a business. So last question, you have a booth here at Right of Boom.
I do.
MSPs can come to your booth. What's maybe one little teaser you can? I mean, this is going to go live after Right of Boom.
Okay.
But there's a lot of people here who aren't at Right of Boom, or are going to listen to this.
Yeah.
What's one thing, like if I were to come to your booth, what's something that excites me about Eric Tild's?
The fact that I used to stand in your shoes. I used to own an MSP, right? And I've been practicing law for 26 years, almost 27 years now. And for 25 or 26 of the years, it's been exclusively for IT companies. And for 13 of those years, it was my own IT company. We started a business out of nothing, and we grew it to 250 employees before we exited it a few years ago. And so I know what keeps people up at night. And what scares me are the people who don't have good contracts and who sleep like a baby, because ignorance is bliss. But my job is to help people sleep better at night, because I've been in their shoes before. I know what keeps them awake. I know what the customers look for. And frankly, once an MSA is drafted, I spend very little time negotiating with the customers, because I like to draft pretty fair agreements that protects the MSP, but it enables business to get done. I mentioned that lawyers tend to sometimes be in the sales prevention business, and it's something I'm very, very cognizant of, and I want to stay away from that as best I can. Yeah. But pay attention to where you're getting your legal advice from. Make sure that it's from someone who knows what they're doing, not your brother-in-law who's a divorce attorney who's going to write your MSA for you. It's at the end of the day, it's not very expensive to have a suite of contracts created for you, for your customers.
Scaling the Wall is brought to you by FifthWall Solutions, a cyber insurance wholesaler wholly focused on bridging the gap between cyber insurance and cybersecurity, making it more affordable, accessible, and understandable. If you're an MSP tired of last-minute insurance apps from your clients, or an agent looking for an easier way to write good coverage, make your way over to FifthWallSolutions.com to learn more about what it means to partner. This podcast is written and produced by me, Will Brooks. Find me on LinkedIn. There are a lot of memes to be found, and I hope you'll tune in next time as we continue to scale the wall of cybersecurity together.